All right. Welcome everybody back from lunch. This time we would like to thank our lunch sponsor, Tampa Bay Lighting. I'm going to introduce the next speaker. Nature, place, craft, and restraint are the design vision that has driven Lake Flato's work for over 35 years. In this presentation, Jonathan Smith will delve into the design process for several of the firm's recent projects, including the AIA Code Top 10 award-winning Austin Central Library, a building shaped by light and design to respond to the context of its place, and the AIA Institute Honor Award-winning Confluence Park, a pavilion design of concrete petals that collect and funnel rainwater to promote water conservation in its community. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Jonathan Smith.
Thank you all for having me today. It's beautiful in my Sarasota Zoom box, so thanks for having me. This is my first long Zoom talk, so my goal here will basically be to make sure y'all don't fall asleep and don't start shopping online while I'm talking, so feel free to add sleeping emojis or whatnot to the chat to let me know. Also, feel free to type questions in there, and I can try and cover some of them as we go or sort of circle up as the end. So today, I just really wanted to give a broad overview about design vision within the history of Lake Flato and the firm, and then talk about how that shared vision has really contributed to recent projects across our range of studios and in a range of scales. And so I co-lead the urban development market sector, and I've been at Lake Flato for 16 years. Two of the projects I'm going to show you were ones I was really deeply involved with, and two weren't. So hopefully you'll save all your hard questions for the ones I know less about. So let me go ahead and share my screen here. Awesome. So in order to start, really want to talk a little bit about who we are and a little bit about the history of the firm. So this is our annual firm retreat. We call it Flake Lato. We all get together in non-COVID times on one of the hottest weekends of the year at a ranch out in West Texas. And everyone comes out there and tries to spend the weekend in the outdoors and not talking about architecture. And everyone at the firm is really passionate about architecture and really passionate about the outdoors and being in the environment. And then everyone at the office is super duper imaginative and competitive. And this is, again, and we would be doing this tomorrow or today if we weren't all working from home, but this is our annual Halloween costume contest, which is the most competitive event of the year at the office. So really where the firm began is it really all started with O'Neill Ford's office in San Antonio. For those of you who are not familiar with O'Neill Ford, I strongly encourage you to take a look at his work. He's the father of Texas modernism. And David Lake and Ted Flato and several other people at the firm moved to San Antonio to work for O'Neill. And the sort of DNA of what Lake Flato is today really starts with him and his thoughtful architecture that's really about not sort of fads and what's in the magazines, but really thinking about architecture as having this timeless quality to it. And then practicing in Texas was huge. So a lot of the early work was in Texas and really tied to the land. And as you all know, Texas has a wide range of landscapes, and really trying to create architecture that's rooted to its place and connecting you more viscerally to the landscape and really increasing your awareness of the site, making you more aware of it. Still to this day within the firm, most of us are more likely to draw inspiration from funny old buildings on the roadsides than we are to the latest, magazines or Art Daily. And I think that's really fun to take these pieces of Central Texas or wherever we're working and really look at the buildings that were done before AC, because they really had to be clever. And then looking at other things like these are road cuts in the hill country in Texas that it's all limestone. And so to get the roads through these very hilly areas, we've cut through the stone. And we oftentimes will use those as inspiration for our limestone walls. This is at the Texas State Cemetery. And then looking at these agrarian, again, the sort of idea of being clever before there was air conditioning. You really had to think about these things and be super clever and make more with less. And we call this sort of agrarian cleverness ranch tech within the office, and thinking through how these things stood the test of time and really worked before there were all these complicated systems making buildings work. So we're often looking for these types of things when we start projects. And then where that started for the beginning of the firm 35 years ago, this is the first project that really put Lake Flato on the map. And it was, again, taking those sort of clever ideas and not being super precious or fashionable with buildings. This was the old Alamo cement plant that had just been decommissioned outside of San Antonio. And the firm at that point got approached by some clients that wanted to do this house out in the hill country. And the superstructure for the old Alamo cement plant was for sale. And so David Lake and Ted Flato and the folks at the firm at that time and the owners figured out how to buy and ship out the old cement plant and cut it into different pieces and make houses out of it, a big house out of it. And then the early work of the firm can really be characterized with a lot of work like this. It's, off the grid, houses on ranches. This one had no air conditioning, using native materials, using local craftsmen, learning how to tune those porches and align them to capture the breezes. And we were, I think, really lucky in that those first clients didn't come to us and say, I want a Tuscan villa, I want a French, manor house. They came to us and said that they weren't fussy about this and they wanted buildings that worked and were out on their land. And those early clients were really into being out in their land. And so having these buildings that bring them closer to that was really key. Since then, those clients that brought us to their ranches, they now have, we sort of grown up with them. They have businesses, they have hotels, they've brought us along. 35 years later, we're practicing all over the country, which has been really interesting, but also a challenge with having our start and one of our basic visions is really sort of understanding the place and making buildings specific to place. So when you're traveling to the North Shore of Kauai to do that from Texas, it's a little more complicated than being in a place that really, really well. But it's been an incredible challenge, and to do that on a huge variety of scales. And then within the firm, the most coveted award within Lake Flato that we were all trying to have our projects win, and it's very competitive, is the Committee on the Environment Award, the COTE Top 10, because we believe this sort of captures the ethos of our best work. And I think Lake Flato was doing sustainable and regional work from the very beginning. And that's sort of where architecture has trended in a lot of ways. And so these projects and the process that we've set up, which is all about vision, is really key to that. So starting out on the first project I want to talk about, this is one that I worked on out in Big Bend. It is the Big Bend Fossil Discovery Exhibit out in far west Texas in the middle of Big Bend National Park. For those of you who don't know, it is very difficult to build buildings in national parks. This was actually the second scheme that we did with them. We did a first scheme that had a few smaller pavilions sort of scattered around, but in the park's biologists and archaeologists, this site had already been disturbed, and so it made sense for it to go here. And Big Bend, this is sort of the geology of Big Bend. The paleontologist that we met with, and this all came about through basically Big Bend has world-class fossils and incredible paleontology, and they had a really sad 1960s sort of roadside marker with a few very faded vitrines out in the desert that sort of talked about this. And so the park's paleontologists and the Friends group for Big Bend were really excited about really telling the story and being more proud of what was going on out there. And they originally approached us about doing a conditioned museum, more or less. And we really thought, being out in Big Bend, that let's figure out a way, and we do this a lot with clients, to push as much of that program outdoors. And in this case, we were able to push it all outdoors, which was great. So effectively, we just ended up making a big shady hat as this big pavilion, and then had a great exhibit designer we walk through the different ages of Big Bend, and we're able to show off the incredible fossils such as Quetzalcoatlus there above us, Deinosuchus, which is the largest crocodile there on the left, and that's Alamosaurus on the right, which is a sort of T-Rex type animal. And then the other thing we're doing here is really taking in the vistas. And here you can see on the right-hand side, there's kid-sized and adult-sized little viewfinders. And those viewfinders will point you to different strata of rock all around Big Bend that show you, the Aguja formation, where the Aguja ceratops comes from. If there's any paleontologists, I probably got that wrong. But the idea was really to, not only are you outdoors in Big Bend, but you're able to really tie those specific fossils to those specific places. And again, going back to sort of that ranch tech, indoor, outdoor ethos, all of this stuff is out in the middle of the desert, and it needs to be able to weather and survive and create shade. This building is completely off the grid. It's solar, and which is super nice. You can also, for those eagle-eyed of you, take a look at the steel pipe. And again, going back to craft and finding people who can craft beautiful things out in Big Bend can sometimes be tough. So we really like to lean on craftspeople that are already out there and have a history of doing things, and not sort of bringing a new craft to the place. So in this case, there are a ton of amazing welders who know how to weld oil field drill pipe. And that's what we ended up making the structure out of. And you can finally hear it is sort of tucked into its already existing, the site that had already been messed with within Big Bend, and it's sort of tucked between these two areas. And there's only a few little glimpses of it you can get from the park road. And so it's been really nice to sort of camouflage in plain sight at Big Bend. The next project is Confluence Park in San Antonio. And this project is really about the San Antonio River Foundation, which, for those of you who've been to San Antonio, our river is a big deal. We have miles and miles of trails along the river. We have the downtown river walk. And recently, in the last decade, San Antonio has really made a commitment to its creekways and having all of the creekways have trails that connect to the river. And so this is at the confluence of the San Antonio River and San Pedro Creek, which is the major creek that is really one of the major reasons San Antonio is here. It has a big springs at San Pedro Springs, and then here is where it's coming into the river. And here you can get a sense for some of those trails. In the last 15 years, in the 1960s, the Army Corps channelized the river, and then in the aughts, the Army Corps engineers unchannelized the river. So now it is returning to a more natural habitat. It's also, we're right near all the Spanish missions, which is the reason that San Antonio is 301 years old, is this string of missions along the beautiful San Antonio River. So this spot is really highly trafficked and is a really fun spot. It's also very close to downtown. You can see downtown off here on the left, and the confluence itself is just off the page to the south. And so here you can see the existing images, and the river is undergoing this transformation from being channelized and mown to being a more natural state. So the trees, you can see these big tooth maples are just starting to come up. And the native wildscape, you know, in 20 or 30 years, this will start to look amazing, but this is a long approach. So again, with these design visions early on in the process, we like to come up with big goals for the project. And so this project, because of the Confluence, was really about connecting to the site and connecting people with water. And then overlaid on that is this idea of, right now, this site, before we got to it, was just sort of stuck in the middle of the city and sort of covered in invasive species, and really tying that back to the local flora and fauna. And then this idea, and the River Foundation, who was our client, was really big on this, is this idea of the art of structure and material. They specifically hired us and wanted us to partner with basically an artist so that this would be a very different feeling building. And then finally, a building that could really be a connection, and not only a confluence of the river and the creek, but a confluence of people and activity. And like all of our projects, we really are hands-on early on and like to get all the ideas out on the table. It doesn't matter where the ideas come from or who they come from, but we really like to get all of the best ideas out early. And I had mentioned on this job, the River Foundation wanted us to partner with an artist. We partnered with Andrew Cutlass, who's down there on the lower left, of Matz's Design. And with him, we really went through these iterative approaches about how to really celebrate water here at Confluence. So here's the site plan, and a lot of it is about being setting a good example and being a good steward. So the parking lot up here in the gray is all a low impact development and all pervious. There's a giant rainwater cistern under here that's collecting a bunch of this water. And then these other slides, I think, do this better justice. So then one of the other big moves here is taking these different types of ecotypes. We're sort of in an area where a lot of things are colliding. We've sort of South Texas, West Texas, and Central Texas all colliding in San Antonio. So really playing that up with different plant species in these different ecotypes, and then actually sculpting the topography here on our site to really celebrate the water and play with the water. We also wanted to do that not only with the landscape, but with the building itself. So figuring out creative ways that we could use the architecture, and in this case, the structure, to do that. So here are some of the early iterations on that, about this idea of the umbrella and the petal and the way leaves collect water, and really working through how those could work. And we really settled on this idea that we really wanted to create these petals that were funnels for water, not just sort of simple shells that are sort of shedding the water, but these two things combined give you something like this on the lower left, which shows how all the rainwater from this goes over to the stormwater, and how when you're there in a rain event, it's really super fun to see all this water filtering through. And then our classrooms for this, and the restrooms, are basically dug into the side of the site with a green roof and solar panels on top. And then here's what we presented to the client: is this series of prefabricated concrete petals that are really all about celebrating the water when it's raining, and creating great shade and a place to congregate when it's not raining. Obviously, a lot of technology goes into that. A lot of visiting the making of the formwork and figuring out how to do this was really entertaining with regard to the concrete. But we had a really great sub and some really great folks to make these incredible fiberglass petal forms. And then here's what you get at the finished product. Is this, graceful pavilion that's really all about celebrating the water. And there's the classroom beyond, and the concrete petals in the foreground. And, it's still early days, but the different plantings are starting to take hold around the end. And it's really been a really successful. I've attended weddings there. There's a weekly yoga class that meets there. All sorts of events take place here, and the River Authority uses it for events. And so it's been really fun to see this pop up on the San Antonio River. and be used. Also, all of the artwork that's within it is really supporting that mission about education. So on the left here, this stainless steel sculpture is the entire watershed of the San Antonio River as it spills out into the Gulf of Mexico. And then school kids are able to come here and use this to learn about the watershed, to learn about the native plants, to learn about the water cycle. And it's really fun to see them run around, and you can see the shadows in the center there from the leave outs between the petals are really fun, and kids get pretty mesmerized by those. And they love sort of tracing the path of the river. So yeah, that one's super fun project. Hopefully we get more concrete petal projects out of that won a couple of concrete awards. And here you can see the San Antonio River since when we started to now, and you can start to see those trees finally starting to grow up. We still do, which is rare for a firm like ours, a lot of residential work. So I did want to show a recent residential project. The vision for this was really about the folks that own this are really into sustainable ranching and really rehabilitating the land, and in particular the stream. And so they were already doing all of these initiatives, and they really wanted a house that really continued to connect them to the nature and really celebrate the ranching heritage of the land. And so we basically split this into two barns. There's a more public barn there on the left and a more private barn on the right with the sleeping areas in it. And we were just really inspired by the site and the history of habitation there. So the idea of barns and creating the idea of interpreting the homestead sort of as a more modern thing, and trying to figure out how we could make this feel like almost like a camp. And so here you can see again these ideas of connection to the outdoors, and really trying to frame these fantastic views both near and far, using local stone, using local materials and craftspeople whenever possible. And then this idea, because it's a ranch and it's out in the middle of nowhere, having this really amazing kitchen. So it really is serving this farm to table function. But it's also, you know, a working, usable thing. It's not super precious. All of the, this is a house that people are living in. And so trying to sort of thread that needle and have it just be this beautiful thing. There are other architects that would have probably not loved this giant crack in the middle of the kitchen, but we're rolling with it. And then this indoor outdoorness. So again, finding places where during the summer, the weather here is fantastic, and figuring out ways where you can have indoor outdoor spaces that can really take advantage of those beautiful times of year. And even in the sort of garage areas and areas where we're storing vehicles, again, going back to loving these beautiful agrarian buildings. And there are projects in the office that we've done for horses and for RVs and for trailers that are for hay that are just as beautiful as the ones that we're doing for people. And here's sort of a closing shot of that and its ridiculous surroundings. Oops. So I want to dive a little bit deeper into the Central Library with regard to vision and process. It's one that I was a project architect on this. I worked on this for over 11,000 hours in my career. And so I think on this project, it was really about setting those big goals early and really getting that vision down. So just to give you a sense of where we are, we're in Austin here, and the city chose this once in a lifetime site that's on the shores of Shoal Creek and on Lady Bird Lake. And it was formerly a brownfield site, so it was part of this downtown substation, and it had sat vacant for years. So it's a big project in relation to the other ones, and that's been something that's been really fun over the last 16 years at Lake Flato for me is to grow up with the firm and see these larger projects. So this is a 200,000 square foot, 6-story high rise. It's on this amazing site, as I said. And the goal that we set with City Council before we got started was to be the best daylit library in America. And the city of Austin said it was going to be the library of the future. So no pressure from the very beginning. So here you can see the bustling metropolis of Austin as it is today. And here's our site over here. This is actually the original Waller plan for the city of Austin, which was then the national capital of the state of Texas. Our site was actually going to be the national penitentiary, but luckily it was not. A lot of things happening at the time for library design. It was a very interesting time to be working on a library. So the voters approved a new central library in 2006. A lot of things with regard to technology were happening. So we didn't all have basically a library in our pocket when the voters approved that. There were also a lot of other things just with regard to technology and the way that we work that were changing. And then on top of that, Austin itself was growing like mad. And so when the voters approved this till now, and it's even crazier now, it's another 500 million people that this building is serving. So what we did at the library was, aside from telling the Austin City Council that we were going to be the best daylit library in the country before getting the job, we really resisted the urge as architects to get out our pens and pencils and our sketchbooks and start designing this. It was really about goal setting. And so the very first thing we did was we went out to the ranch where we do Flake Lato every year with our partners on this project, which was Shepley Bullfinch out of Boston. And we had a 2 or 3 day session where we just hung out and talked about what a library should be. We looked at recent precedents, but we did not start designing the building. So some of the aspirations that we looked at were that, and in the meetings with Austin, they really are into their books. So books are a technology too. So this has 1 foot in the digital and 1 foot in the analog. Creating a space for everybody. We want to create a open source sort of hub for everyone in Austin. And the site, as I was showing, was really interesting, being on the shores of Lady Bird Lake and on the shores of Shoal Creek, but also on the edge of downtown. So it has this really interesting dual personality. And then the biggest failing after touring their existing library was that it didn't adapt gracefully to change. So we really wanted to make sure that we were able to make a library. We don't exactly know what a library is going to be in 20, 30, 50 years. So figuring out a way to create a well-loved sort of open source building so that the library and the citizens of Austin can figure that out in the future is really key. So after having that big workshop, we also had another big workshop. We're big on workshops. We had an integrated design workshop that basically, and it's a huge project, it had over 30 consultants on it. Any consultant that had anything to do with the performance of the job was in this early integrated design workshop. And we spent another 2 full days that was really about visioning, setting guiding principles and goal setting. And the other key thing was visiting the site, which led to some really interesting outcomes. And it was also about not trying to design the building, and that was key. We really wanted to get everyone from the client to the mechanical engineer on the same page about goals before we started designing this thing, and then sort of cramming goals and forms into it. So one of those big things early was figuring out the water cycle for the building. And one of the goals that came out of this was being a good example of resource management for the city of Austin. At the time the building was under design, and during most of its construction, Central Texas was in the worst drought since the 1950s. And so knowing that water is at times extremely scarce in Central Texas, and trying to figure out ways where we can utilize it. And what we ended up with on the aspirations, that image on the upper left is from that integrated design workshop, and that's us on site, and that's just off our property line. as part of the old downtown electrical substation, we found an existing underground vault. And we, throughout the project, worked with the Austin Water to be able to utilize that vault as effectively a free, almost 400,000 gallon cistern downtown. So we had to do some really interesting things, and we had to jump through some hoops to get some license agreements, to get pipes going from our building to their building. We had to make sure it was waterproof. We had to do some other things. But this was a really fantastic story of taking existing infrastructure that's downtown and was doing nothing for anybody on a brownfield site and repurposing it basically for free and giving the taxpayers both a free cistern, but they're also saving money as well on the reduction of water usage in the building. And then the daylight, and I'll talk a lot about daylight. You'll probably be sick of daylight here by the end of this, but thinking through how we were going to be the best daylight library in the country. And these were the early drawings from that very first charrette that was about splitting the building into different chunks and then having these skylights and sort of atrium or openings to the outdoors that would, or streets that would let light down in. Ultimately, with the programmatic requirements of the building, it became slightly larger because we couldn't figure out how to get the books and people to flow accurately with the 3 bars. So we ended up with a 2-bar and a wider atrium in the middle that you'll see. And then in order to achieve that aspiration, we hired a daylighting consultant. And so we had, again, another 2-day charrette. So we had a 2-day daylighting workshop that included the architecture team of Lake Flato and Shepley Bullfinch, the interior designer, the artificial lighting designer, and the daylight designer. And what we did was we built this big model of the atrium. We had started initially doing a lot of studies in the computer, which is great. But this was the single biggest help on this entire project. Was we built what we called the dollhouse, which is this 4-foot tall model of the atrium with the daylight designer's guidelines, which includes the reason it's sort of a dollhouse and not a traditional architect's model is that the colors in the model represent the colors in real life. So you get the light bouncing around. And the crazy thing about daylight, if you think about it too hard, is it's scalable. So we took this out to a park and actually turned it to different times of year so that we could accurately model the daylight that was happening. And so here we are, you know, making changes on the fly. Gus there in the black hat and I spent the whole night in between day 1 and day 2 rebuilding the entire roof to make some modifications and then tried it again. So for all of you at home in Zoom land, here is the daylight process that you can do on all your projects from now on. So what we did was we built a 1/4-inch scale model, in this case of our 6-story atrium. And then we utilized the sun conditions. So we took this outside and scooted it around and pointed it so we would know, you know, it was whatever, 2 o'clock in the afternoon in this case, let's say. And the other thing that the daylight designer did, we did luminance mapping on these as well. But one of the other things I thought was really interesting is we would turn on and off the different apertures so that you could really understand how much light you were getting out of the south clear story, say, than any other of the openings, which was really helpful. So you would turn off by covering up with black fabric the whole center skylight and the north clear story and any light you were getting from the east and west. And that enabled you to just play with and simulate the south clear story and tune it by itself. Anyway, super fun, highly recommend it. Want to do it on all my projects going forward that are big enough. And then we made adjustments and basically repeated it all over again. So we adjusted the apertures on the roof and the openings and really went through. So here's all of the apertures off like I was talking about. So you can see the purple, it's all off. Here is the north clear story and you're getting a little bit of, you know, not a lot of light out of the north, a little bit of the red here. And then here you can really see that north central clear story or skylight's 128 feet long and 14 feet wide. It's really doing a huge amount of work here, and you can see how much it's lighting up this area compared to here. And then the south here, again, bringing a lot of light and washing this entire panel. Now this whole facet is now bright, as is the big wall here. So there's some really a lot of cool luminance mapping and daylight studies and working through how this would work, which is hugely important for the project. And then figuring out too the sort of percent of time of effectively daylit. In the integrated design workshop, we set a goal that we wanted 70% of the regularly occupied spaces to be effectively daylit. And so constantly checking through the digital and analog tools was really key. So a few just like, again, sort of tactical lessons learned from that workshop that we made changes that you'll see in the actual building is that originally the guardrails that were all around the atrium, we originally had all of those were clear, but we found that if we made those out of a translucent white, it actually bounced the light a lot better throughout the atrium and created more perceived brightness. Strangely, a lot of daylight is actually in your brain and perceived, and you can be effectively daylit, but it can kind of feel dark. And so this was one of those moves that helped us do that. That's the reason why the bridges in the library actually have lighting underneath them. And that's so that they're perceived as light and they don't feel like a shadow in the atrium, even though you would still be effectively daylit. It's also the reason the lobbies in the library are smaller and darker. It's so that you're not competing with the sun outside. Anytime you walk directly into a building from the sun outside, it's going to feel darker. So we wanted you to walk into an intervening darker space and then back into a lighter space, which is the atrium. There's these super large walls on the north side of the atrium, and the client originally wanted those to be green walls. But when we put our green piece of felt in our daylight model, it sucked all the light right out. And we didn't know of any white plants. So figuring out how to make that a white material that would really bounce light around became very crucial. And then finally, we added these glass fins on the south side to avoid glare. And then here's what we showed City Council. And here is us during construction. So that is my compatriot, Daniel, and we are at the very tippy top of the atrium. We've climbed a very creepy ladder to get there. And we're on what the contractor called the dance floor, which is, there's 6 stories of scaffolding, and then we're on plywood flooring. And what he's doing at the end of that 128-foot long skylight is he is taking daylight measurements to make sure that there are no surprises and we are tracking through. So we actually tracked this project all the way through CA, as Daniel and I were doing the bulk of the CA. And whenever we got submittals, we were thinking about them through the vision of the entire project. So does this meet the daylighting goals? Are we shooting ourselves in the foot here by approving this color that isn't quite as bright as other colors? This is the day on the job site where I actually thought this might work. So we showed up this day and they had put in the studs for the underside of the atrium, and just the studs with the clear plastic on the south clear story gave a really great light sort of grazing across the studs. And that's when I thought, okay, this might actually work. I might be able to sleep at night. And then as they started putting the acoustical plaster on, here you can start to see the underside of this thing. And the thing that we didn't know at the beginning of this that was fascinating during construction is they're going to build this thing, and we sort of knew it intuitively, but they're going to build it from the top down. So you won't know whether it's worked from an acoustical standpoint or a light standpoint until it's too late to fix it because they've taken all the scaffolding out. So once we figured that out, that was truly terrifying. But basically, we worked with them each week as they were working on this. So this is all acoustical plaster that's getting ready to go up on this. And then here's Daniel again on the dance floor, 6 stories up, taking light meter measurements. And they they came out right where we were in the computer, which was really, really exciting. And so here's sort of the broad overview of the daylight. And the other cool thing about doing daylight during construction is we're actually doing light meter readings in areas where, unless you have a drone with a light meter on it, you'd never be able to get back to. So it's really nice to be able to sort of test the science of the daylight there. So yeah, you've got the daylight process, the physical modeling, the digital modeling, the luminance mapping, the on-site measurements, and then all of the work during CA to make sure that your colors and everything are working out right. Also, I'll point out in the physical modeling shot there, you can see that bright red 3.5 story tall cuckoo clock. That is our Art in Public Places project for the building. And we knew early that that was going there. And we were terrified that it was going to turn the entire atrium pink because of its super bright red color. And so we actually built that into all these models and showed that it was not, in fact, going to turn the library pink. And the interior designer actually took cues off of that and had some red furniture sprinkled throughout so that your eye wasn't just like always drawn towards the clock. So here you can see the rendering on the left that we showed City Council. And there I am on the right, walking up the stairs right before the furniture is going in. And it's really rare that the finished building is better than the rendering, but in this case, because of all that hard work and everybody on the team pulling in the same direction for this gigantic goal of being the best daylight library in the country, we really got there, which was super duper exciting. So here you can see we're on, this is where we are downtown, and trying to really connect this library and integrate it into downtown was really fun. So we've got 3 main entries on 2 different levels. So for those of you who've done a library, that makes it very complicated to make sure you're checking out books right, but we were able to get there. So the library sort of controls this park, and there's an entry off of there, and then there's an entry off of Cesar Chavez Street and an entry off of 2nd, and those all come into the atrium at the base. And here you can see where we got with our rainfall. So here's how the rainfall works. As I was saying, this is that the 373,000 gallon cistern across the street. So every bit of rain that falls on this thing and all of our condensate go over there. Then they come over to a smaller tank over here, and we got our big water goal accomplished, which was potable water is only for drinking and showering, which was huge. And it was great to work through that with the city and get everyone on board. And we are actually watering all of the library's landscape as well as the park's landscape with this rainwater and condensate. And so here are just some finished pictures of the building. And so again, really trying to tie this into its place and to Austin. And so we've got roughback Lueders limestone that you'll see all around the building. And we did use this sort of road cuts I was talking about earlier with this idea of putting these dark charcoal bands that you'll see on some of the areas. And then just trying to have this thing really set within its site. And so on the south side, it has these lighter perforated corrugated metal scrim that's really trying to cool the entire facade and sort of pre-cool it so that the edge of the building isn't 120 degrees, it's 100 degrees or 95 degrees. And then as it steps back to the north, it's sort of less organic with the river and more stone. And the reason for a lot of the facets on the building is really on the inside to get these incredible framed views to the outside. And so here is the atrium. And you can see just like in the daylight study, how this south-facing facet really has a lot of light on it. And you're really getting a ton of light through the centerpiece, the lights of the bridges like I was talking about, and the way that the light just sort of flows down through the space. We've surrounded the atrium purposefully with really fun activities. We didn't want the edge of the atrium just to sort of feel like a mall. So there's desks up against the edge of the atrium. There's programming. This bay window here, these are called shared learning rooms. They're basically co-working spaces where different companies or nonprofits can meet. People are studying in them. And then the stairs themselves, we really wanted to design in a way where the elevators were very secondary, and people really wanted to use the stairs. And that's been really fun to see in person, is to show up and hang out in the lobby like I like to do. And you'll actually see kids pulling their parents away from the elevators to take the stairs. So that's been fantastic. The other thing that we were concerned about with a 6-story atrium is just all of the infrastructure. So we worked really hard with our fire protection folks to make sure that sprinklers were really well positioned, and in particular to make sure all of our smoke evacuation equipment was really well dealt with. We've all been in places where those haven't, and they can wreak havoc on your design. So this north side that has a smaller clear story, there are louvers on both the east and west of that big move, and that sort of sawtooth on the outside, and that's where all of the smoke evacuation equipment is, behind these louvers. So in the event of a fire or during the testing, those big fans kick on and all the smoke goes up through these and out through the roof. So it's really, really fun. Also, the concrete on this project was huge, and getting the mock-ups right and getting the color right so that we weren't too dark. Here you can see the bridges, as we were talking about. So this is the main lobby on level 2. So the creek entries straight ahead of us, the 2nd Street entries to the left of us, and the Cesar Chavez entries to the right of us. So this is sort of the main landing point, sort of info desk. And again, the way that the stairs work their way around, so you can see part of Christian Muller's bright red cuckoo clock. And one of the other things that actually came out of that daylighting charrette was this bridge originally was going to be wood, and in the daylighting charrette, it was really making this whole area super dark. So this went to a steel and glass bridge, which was really fun to work on and see it actually work and make that area brighter. Was pretty cool. So here we are in 3. This is outside the children's area. So the other thing I talked earlier about flexibility and about programming, the first 3 stories of this building are not like what you would consider a traditional library. The first floor has a large 350-seat event room on it for events, and everything happens there, from proms to citywide trainings to political debates to South by Southwest. Then on the 2nd floor, you've got a big gallery space, you have a restaurant and a bookstore. And then on the 3rd floor is children on the south side and teens on the north side. And then 4, 5, and 6 have your more traditional library stack space, along with more untraditional stuff like a technology petting zoo, which is pretty cool. So the kids space, wanted to give them something super fun. The wall there is really cool and really evocative, and you would never know that that is a rated wall, and that's fiberglass, and there's a lot of complications going on there, but it turned out really nice, and the kids love that space. If I had to do it over again, I think I would have reinforced the circles a little bit more. There's some pretty big kids that have been getting into those. And then the teens area, they're more urban, so they have the city side facing part of the building. So they're looking out towards the new buildings that are going up all around this project as it's been under construction and beyond. And then we worked with a local fabricator to design this water jet scrim that has quotes about libraries and reading and learning in it. That was a whole nother project unto itself. That was really fun. The first spaces every day in this building to fill up are the outdoor spaces. And so really, one of the goals early on was Austin loves its outdoor spaces. It's got a climate that for a large chunk of the year is very conducive to that. So figuring out how to make this building not feel like a big institutional building, but have this sort of come as you are, laid back Austin approach, and to be indoor outdoor was really important to us and to the city. And so we had lots of conversations early on with the city about, well, what does it mean to have outdoor spaces? How does everyone check out a book? Can someone cut open the screen and throw their new book out? And so I think we were able to work through all those hurdles with the city. And then we placed these on the southeast corner of the building, which is where all the breezes are coming from. And it's even better than that because they're coming across the lake. So it's even a better southeast breeze than you would normally get. And so these areas are, especially with their big fans on them, are very comfortable and very used throughout the year, which has been fantastic. And then the roof garden is also super busy and bustling. It's a really great place to have a meeting. And we got the cafe, who is on the first floor, which is called Cookbook, which is all cuisine from the library's cookbook collection out of their recipes. And it has funny things like cocktails like Tequila Mockingbird. They're very fun with their names. Anyway, they have a coffee cart on the roof so that you're able to actually have coffee. You don't have to leave the library. And there's this amazing space up on the roof that overlooks Austin, overlooks the lake. And it's great to see a public amenity have that space, not just people working at Google in this tower or people in their 40-story condo in this tower. And we've got a live oak up there and a bunch of trees. And we were also able to partner with the city's electric utility to do a solar array on the downtown grid, which is a Herculean effort. So we have a 180 kilowatt array on this building, and it's saving the city of Austin $100,000 a year on this building's operation. And so here it is, this sort of iconic view of it from Lady Bird Lake. And so porches are over here, roof decks over here, and there's a 200 car parking garage underneath. So we start all the projects setting these huge goals, and then we work on the project to make sure that we are trending towards those goals. And then at the end of the job, we come back around and make sure we sort of check our work and try and learn from these and see how we did. So on the library, we beat our 70% daylit occupied space to 80. The rest of these were trending about where we wanted them to be. But this enabled us, this process enabled us, the city just mandated LEED Silver, but because we got the client to buy into these big ideas of major energy reductions, outdoor spaces, clever water reductions, and this idea of daylight, when we did our first checklist, we were well over LEED Platinum, and then everyone at the city got excited about being their first LEED Platinum in their portfolio. So we were able to achieve LEED Platinum, which was really great. And then the building, we also are liking to track as many other things as we can. So before COVID, we had over 100,000 average monthly visitors, which in its first 2.5 years or so pre-COVID was a 300% increase over the last location. And then on top of that, it's been really great. We've been tracking calls on misconduct and calls to the police, which despite growing by 3 times in population, we still have half of the calls in misconduct, which has been just fantastic to be a part of. I think I'm about on time for 15 minutes or so. If we have a conversation, questions, and I haven't been able to check the chat because I'm not able to walk and chew gum at the same time, but please fire away.